Good morning. I think we're able to continue with Dr. Stewart.
Yes, indeed, my lord. The next witness is Dr. David Stewart.
Good morning, Dr. Stewart.
Morning.
As you understand, you're about to be asked some questions by Mr. McIntosh, who's sitting opposite you. But I understand before we enter into questioning, you're prepared to affirm.
Indeed.
Sitting where you are, would you please repeat after me the words that I'm about to give you? I solemnly, sincerely, and truly
I solemnly, sincerely, and truly
declare and affirm
declare and affirm
that I will tell the truth,
that I will tell the truth,
the whole truth,
and
nothing but the truth.
and nothing but the truth.
Thank you, Dr. Stewart. Now, I don't know how long your evidence will take. We've scheduled the morning. We will take a break at about 11:30 for coffee. But if you want a break at any other time, just give me an indication and we can take a break.
Okay.
Mr. McIntosh.
Thank you. Thank you, my lord. Dr. Stewart, firstly, I can get your full name and your occupation.
David Armour Stewart, I'm retired.
And before you retire, what was your last appointment you held?
I was a consultant physician in geriatric medicine. It was a clinical job, and I was also Deputy Medical Director, Greater Glasgow.
Before we go into that in some detail, you provided a statement to the inquiry.
Yes.
Would you be willing to adopt that as part of your evidence?
I would. I've just, if you forgive me, I've noticed one slight
Of course. So
mistake.
if you could go by the... Have you got a copy that's got numbers in the top right-hand corner?
Yes.
What page is it on?
It's right at the beginning, 1A. Chronological professional history.
Yes.
I say at the end, the last sentence, last sentence, Lead Director for Acute Medical Services. That actually should read Deputy Medical Director.
So rather than lead, it should be deputy?
It should be Deputy Medical Director, yes.
We'll make that change. And subject to that, are you willing to adopt this as part of your evidence?
Yes.
Now, I'm conscious that you're now retired.
Yes.
And as you explain in the statement, you don't remember some of the instances we're talking about.
Indeed.
And of course, in order to assist you, we provide you with a list of documents. What I'm proposing to do is to walk through some of these documents and hope that having the opportunity to look at them over the last few days assists you in helping us with some of the questions.
Okay.
What I wanted to do first was just thinking of your role as Deputy Medical Director for Acute Medical Services.
Yeah.
So that's from 15 to 19 when you retired.
Yes.
Now, we in the inquiry have been focusing on a number of particular wards in the new hospital, both adults and children's. And what I want to do is I'll just mention what they are and then ask you to explain your responsibility, what responsibility you had in respect of those 4 particular bits. So the first is in the children's hospital, Ward 2A. The second is in the adult hospital, Ward 4B, the adult bone marrow transplant unit. Then Ward 4C with its hematology beds. And then there's respiratory wards on 5C and 5D. So what was your responsibility in respect of these 4 wards as Deputy Medical Director, Acute Medical Services?
Okay, so I think the reason it's important that I said it was Deputy Medical Director and struck the Acute Medical Services
Right.
bit was I had really 2 roles as Deputy Medical Director. I reported up to the Chief Operating Officer for the acute sector. And so I was in that role, the acute, if you like, Deputy Medical Director. But I also reported up separately to the Medical Director of the board. And in that role, I had more of a board overwide role, more strategic sort of planning type role.
So you've got a mixture of what you might describe as operational management,
Indeed.
Clinical role.
That's right.
In respect of acute services.
Indeed.
And a slightly, I hesitate to say amorphous, but general role in terms of corporate matters.
That's exactly right.
And just taking that second role first, to some extent, does that involve doing what the medical director asks you to take on?
To a large extent, it does, yes.
Right. When it comes to your acute medical services role,
Yes,
these 4 wards or groups of wards
Yes.
fall within your responsibility.
they do.
Now, we're conscious that the Children's Hospital is managed, if I understand it correctly, by a section of the Health Board that deals with women and children's services.
Yes,
But is that within the acute medical services world?
it is.
And the adult hospital, is that one unit or is it multiple units within
Uh,
the?
I suppose, sorry, it's a slightly complicated answer. Yes and no. It's one unit in the sense that there is one director who runs the hospital and is responsible for that. But in terms of the professional leads, there were, well, it changed. It used to be that they were run as separate services. So women,
Children and adults.
yeah, but within adults, you would have surgery run as a separate service, medicine run as a separate service. That changed so that it was run more as a whole hospital. So that's a kind of convoluted way to come back to your question being, was adult run separately? The answer is yes.
So adults run separately. Within adult, at the beginning of your time, there would have been separate, not quite silos, but systems for surgery and medical.
That's right.
But by the end of your time, there's simply one medical lead
for each hospital.
For each of the 2 hospitals. Right, that's helpful. Now, you explain in your statement that you're not qualified to make judgments about infection control matters.
Not technical infection control matters.
Yes, well, so that's what I wanted to understand. On page 138 of the PDF, which is paragraph 13 of the statement, you explain in the bottom half of the middle of the page, I make no judgments about infection control matters. This is the context of the hospital opening. As this is not my role, I'm not qualified to do so. Now, I appreciate you're quite an experienced doctor by this point, so this may be half the answer. But you end up chairing the Board Infection Control Committee at points.
Yes.
So how does that work from the point of, we're obviously not involved in running this hospital, or we're learning.
Okay.
How does it work to have someone who's not got the technical qualifications or background in infection control chairing a Board Infection Control Committee?
The Infection Control Committee wasn't a highly technical committee, if you like. It wasn't there to get into the fine detail, the arcana of infection control. It was there to receive reports which were relevant to the runnings of the hospital. It wasn't even just there for the infection control team. There were other representatives there as well, general management, infectious diseases, etc. So it was more of a kind of general overview of infection control rather than a technical committee. I would say to some extent chairing these committees is a kind of generic duty of managers and medical managers. I mean, another example would be I chaired the board's Information Management and Technology Committee, but I'm not a computer scientist.
I appreciate that. So the thing that intrigues us is that we have had some quite detailed evidence from Mr. Walsh, who was the infection control manager, about the system that he set up and operated post-Veil of Leven for these reports that are feeding up through IPC Senior Management Team, Acute Infection Control Committee, Board Infection Control Committee. And it does seem to be quite a structured system of reports against looking at national targets and national reporting microorganisms, policies, and these are all the things that you're dealing with at the committee eventually.
Yeah.
One of the areas that the inquiry is interested in is unusual microorganisms. And I've asked a series of questions of various infection control nurses, nurse consultants, and we're asking more and more of the microbiologists and infection control doctors, how does a system react to the unusual? And so what I'd be interested in knowing is how does, from your perspective as a chair of these committees, how do these committees assure themselves that the system below them is noticing the unusual microorganisms and is not simply, perhaps to put it simply, focusing on the targets set in the national guidance and missing things?
So, I mean, the role of the chair of the committee really is to run the meetings, to make sure that all the business gets done, to make sure that everybody has their input. But at the end of the day, it's the committee that takes the view. It's the committee that approves the minutes. It's the committee that approves the actions. It's not the chair as such that does that. So as chair, really, you're relying on the experts who are attending the committee to talk to those matters. It's not something that you would expect to be conversant with yourself.
No, I think I perhaps wasn't the question I was hoping, and maybe I misphrased it.
Right.
It's not so much, are you the person who can get into a detailed discussion about particular bacteria? I'm not suggesting that.
Okay.
It's more, how do you satisfy yourself that the system of which you are chairing the top committee
Yes.
is capable of spotting the unusual?
Well, it's based on the advice that the experts around the table at the committee are giving you. They will come and report on the situation. They'll report on their analysis of it and what they're doing about it. There'll be others around the table that may wish to question them on that. But at the end of the day, you're relying on those experts to report what the situation is.
Because after, I don't think it involves particular meetings that I'm going to go to, but some of the suggestions are that at times the advice of infection control doctors is, if not ignored, is challenged by those who don't have the expertise to challenge it. Now, is there not a danger in the system you're describing that a couple or an individual experienced expert can get slightly drowned out by a sort of corporate pressure not to want to hear or to see it, to minimize a problem?
I think what I was describing was almost the opposite of that. In at the committee, it would be the infection control expert that would be bringing papers, that would be presenting the issues to you for consideration by the committee. I cannot remember a single instance of the committee then overruling or challenging that in any way.
Thank you. And what I want to do is deal with the opening of the hospital. And you explained in your statement, if we just jump to page one, same page in fact, at the top, you mentioned, we asked if you were involved in transferring patients from the old site to the new hospital. And you described your role as planning the safe transfer and clinical care of patients. And you go on to say, I didn't encounter any significant problems with this process. And I do appreciate that you had no role in deciding which services would transfer. What wanted to explore with you is, in order to have a safe transfer, would it not be necessary to know that the facilities you're transferring them into are safe?
It would, yes.
And so how would you, as the person responsible for safe transfer, ensure that that threshold was met?
Well, I think I was responsible for an element of the transfer, if you like. I was responsible for patient care during the transfer process. So were there enough doctors? Were there enough nurses? What would happen in the case of an emergency? Were the critical care facilities there? If there was a cardiac arrest, who would deal with that? It was all that side of things. Right. My role wasn't to assess whether the facility I was moving the patients into was safe. That was others to.
Now, to some extent, would it be fair to say that in order for this system to operate smoothly, you have to assume that other people have done their job, whatever that is?
Indeed.
Yeah. Now, obviously you're aware that there's an issue arises about ventilation. And you, as you've explained, are responsible for the practicalities of the transfer. But if I'd asked you back then, you're moving to this new hospital, what do you think of it? What would you have said?
Well, I think I've said my statement. I mean, I did see the hospital before it opened, and it looked very impressive. You know, having been used throughout most of my career up until then to operating out of buildings 100 years old, it looked like a significant step forward. But they were very much general impressions. I mean, I certainly wasn't getting into the detail of what.
No, I appreciate that. If you take this off the screen, it's more sort of.
Yeah.
And again, I appreciate there are many more things to a operationally safe hospital than its ventilation system. There's lots of things one has to consider. But again, with the benefit of, in sense, hindsight, imagine I'm there and I come up to you and say, would you expect this hospital to be built in terms of national guidance? What would you have said?
Of course, absolutely.
Yeah. And of course, you didn't know at the time that to some extent it wasn't.
That's correct.
Yeah. Now, if we can take this off the screen, and what I want to do is, you asked questions about, well, in fact, sorry, go back to that document, page 139. You're asked at question 15. Shortly after the hospital opened, an issue emerged regarding the adequacy of the ventilation in the bone marrow treatment ward. And you said, I remember only that concerns were raised. I had no direct involvement with this. Now, we produced some documents that suggest that you did have some involvement in it. Have you had a chance to look at those?
The only one I think there was a document referring to a meeting that Grant Archibald called that I was present at. Is that the one you?
Well, let's go through them because I mean, at one level, this isn't a memory test, but there's a couple of things where we're quite keen to get your views. Yeah. If we could go to Bundle 14, Volume 1, Document 8, page 202. Oh,
great. Yep.
So this is an email from Professor Williams to you, 19th of June. So this is almost before, just before transfer.
Yep.
And he's obviously spoken to you, and it seems the lobbied side rooms in ITU, HDU have not got their HEPA filters fitted. Yep. And then you see in the second paragraph, there's a reference to Ward 4B1.
Yeah.
And so there's also an email which I wanted to show you, which you may not have seen at the time, which is Bundle 5, Document 1, page 18. Yes. So this email was sent to you by a bunch of haematologists. And they want to make you and Dr. Armstrong and David Dunlop. Who was David Dunlop at the time?
David Dunlop was the, I'm trying to remember what the title was. He was the Associate Medical Director, I think the title was, responsible for oncology, regional services and cancer care.
Thank you. So these 8 on haematologists, well, and Professor Jones, send this document to you three, and they have an attachment which is on the next page, which goes into the situation in some detail. Have you had an opportunity to read that? Since
I have, yes.
So this seems to arise. Would you accept that to some level people are raising issues with you and others at this early stage?
Can I come back to the Craig Williams one?
Yes, of course. We go back to Craig Williams. So that's Bundle 14, please. Okay. Volume 1, Document 8. Okay. Yes.
So I think this comes back to, if you like, my dual role.
Yes.
And I think it's in what capacity is he writing to me? So at the time around the move to the hospital, I would say the great majority of my job was with my acute hat on. The operational role, the day-to-day, the week-to-week. There were huge challenges around unscheduled care, around any waiting times, etc., and that was consuming most of my time. And Dr. Williams has written to me, quite as you say, to inform me of an issue in the wards. I would have expected him to do that. I think he's writing to me for my information because, as someone who is responsible for the day-to-day running, it's important that I would know these things. But I think it is for information. I don't think he's asking me for action.
No, I don't think he is.
So when you say involved with, I have been informed about.
Yes. So let's move on then to Bundle 27, Volume 3, Document 12. Okay. Previous page. Page before that. Yes.
Yep.
So this appears to an email where Gary Jenkins, so what was Gary Jenkins' role at the time?
Gary Jenkins' role at the time was, I think he was the Director for Regional Services.
So effectively he would have been Dr. Dunlop's equivalent in management side.
That's correct, yeah.
And so he is telling you and and Grant Archibald
Yep.
about a briefing note.
Yep.
And this is a discussion about the transfer of the service back to the Beatson.
Yep.
So would you say this is him just keeping you informed?
I would.
Right, okay. And if we can go on to the next document, it's bundle 13, document 117. So this appears to be a meeting that you've chaired.
Yep.
And this is obviously a board infection control committee. And if we, do you remember this meeting?
No, not specifically, no.
The reason I'm asking about this particular minute is because this is at a point when there seems to be some discussion about the movement back. And what I'm asking, the reason it concerns me is that there seems to be an issue with ventilation in Ward 4B. And we can take that off the screen. And if we can go to bundle 13, document 70, page 525. This is what looks like, it doesn't seem to be an obvious meeting of any particular committee. I mean, I may have misunderstood this. And if you go to, you see that you're recorded. Sorry, I'm in the wrong place. Sorry, it's the next one. Page, yes, 525. There's a discussion in the minute on page 530. Where a meeting of you, chaired by you, is discussed. Now, this isn't a minute of a meeting you were present at, but it's a report that a meeting was held with the state to discuss the BMT, and David Stewart chaired the meeting. At the moment, these beds are being used as winter medical beds. So this is January 16. And I'm getting the impression that you're being told lots of things and you're chairing meetings that are discussing this issue. And we understand the issue is that the isolation rooms didn't originally have HEPA filters. It's not possible to achieve the proper 10 pascals differential pressure. And this is considered to be sufficient an issue that the adult bone marrow treatment patients have gone back to the Beatson. Now, of course, they can go back to the Beatson because there's a working hospital at the Beatson. And the pediatric patients, why can't they go back anywhere?
I don't know.
Because there's no York Hills. I mean, York Hill's closed. So
sorry.
that's the
Yeah,
difference.
okay. Yeah, I get you.
But the thing that I'm trying to understand is when all this is happening, when you're being told and you're chairing meetings about what can only be described as flaws of some level in the specification of these particular isolation rooms in an important part of the hospital, where the consequence is that the patients have moved back to their old hospital. Would it not at that point have been a good time to start asking the question, what else is wrong with the hospital? Because that doesn't seem to happen.
So the meeting that's minuted there, I don't remember. I don't know if you've got minutes of that or...
We haven't.
No, okay. So I don't know what was discussed and I don't remember the detail of that meeting. I think this now, again, it maybe comes back to my dual roles and in what role am I there?
Yes.
So, as I said earlier, the great majority of my time at that time was with my acute hat on, but I was still working with the medical director, and as you say, I was taking instruction from her on things to do. And there would be, from time to time, she would say, she can't go to a meeting, would I go instead? But that might be the only one of those series of meetings. I think that Board Infection Control Committee, for instance,
I think it
may
is,
well be
you're
an
right,
example of that.
It is, yeah.
So there were, if you like, sporadic meetings that I would be at representing the medical director because she may have had something else to do. But I wasn't, I didn't have a continuing involvement in it. So, for instance, I think there's you'll maybe come to the documents later, where there's meetings about the BMT, where I am at a meeting, but there's a whole load of subsequent meetings that
Yeah,
I'm
no, I
not
think I
at.
would do. Yes,
So, with regard to that specific meeting, as I say, I can't remember the detail. I don't know what was discussed, and I don't know what, if any, actions I had from it. But your general point was, should you be asking questions? I guess the answer to that is yes, you should. Yeah.
Because the impression that I should need to put to you is that we've heard quite a lot of evidence and seen quite a lot of documents that infection control doctors and haematologists are concerned enough to raise this issue and ultimately to move the service back to the beats.
Yep.
And they do that for their balance of risk discussions. And we're not second guessing that. But somewhere in the organization, why does no one, and I'm, as it were, picking on you because you're the deputy medical director and you're here.
Okay.
Why does no one go, gosh, they didn't build this bit as we thought they were going to. Is there anything wrong with the rest of the building? And can you answer that?
Well, if you're asking me why I didn't do that.
Yeah, that's all the best I can do.
All right, yeah. If you ask me why I did that, I think it comes back to what I've already said, that the great majority of my time was spent not in that role. It was spent in the day-to-day operational challenges around the running of the hospital. The bigger issues with estates and the BMT and decisions to move back were not something that I was involved with to any great extent. I mean, you know, there's meetings referred to, but I was barely involved in that at all. That was largely the remit of the medical director and the infection control team that were dealing with that.
Because the thing that also is going on at the time, to be fair, I haven't produced all these documents for you, but you may be aware, is that other isolation rooms elsewhere in the hospital are subject to similar questions.
Yeah.
Not just in the Schiehallion unit, but also there are other isolation rooms in the hospital where there are similar problems. Now, given there are something like 30 isolation rooms in this hospital when it opens, the fact that infection control doctors, and at this point, the sector infection control doctor, Dr. Peters, and to some extent Dr. Inkster, are raising questions about why the isolation rooms, in my words, flawed. Yeah. Is that not something that in your acute acute services hat you should have been noticing?
We were yes, absolutely, and we were aware of that, but it wasn't ours to fix, if you like. It was other people were dealing with that matter. And we were being kept informed about what was going on, but it didn't fall within our remit. We didn't have the authority almost to be dealing with that. This was an issue for infection control estates, and that was taking place, as I say, outside of our remit.
Because we've had evidence from Professor Williams that at this point he's asking questions of members of the project team. He's not getting answers. Yep. And in some cases, he suggests that some of the answers he gets aren't true. Yep. And at the same time, haematologists write to you. Now, they may write to you wearing a particular hat, and they may be informing you for information purposes, but it seems a big step in NHS GGC for a bunch of consultants to get together and write a letter to the medical director. That seems to be something that is notable.
Yes.
And so it seems likely that whatever infection control or the project team or the estates team had in terms of authority or interest didn't work.
Yeah.
So the next stop is the professional medical leads.
Yes.
And that's Dr. Armstrong.
Yes.
And at this point, you.
Yes.
And what you seem to be saying is that, certainly speaking for yourself, and I can speak to Dr. Armstrong in a few weeks' time, you were working on the principle that other people were dealing with this.
I was working on the principle that other people, and that other people includes Dr. Armstrong, were dealing with this, yes.
Well, that's very helpful. What we'll do is we'll move on to another section, if you don't mind. There is, in your statement, if we go back to page 140, you asked a series of questions about infection control, the team, resignations, and ultimately a report you produced. And so what I want to do is walk through this. I don't really need to have this on the screen anymore.
Okay.
And the document I'm going to end up asking you about, but I'll put it up just now so we can make the connection, is Bundle 14, Volume 1, Document 41, page 464. So I'm going to come back to this, but I'm just putting up, so this is where we're going to.
Okay.
And we've had some evidence about how this happened from other people. And you appear to explain in your statement that this was written by you, this report, because Dr. Armstrong asked you to investigate certain issues.
Yes.
Now, having had the opportunity to look at the report,
Yes.
what were the issues she asked you to investigate?
Okay, so at the time, there were a lot of the tensions, I think, that you've probably heard from already from other infection control doctors were coming to the fore. There were issues being raised. I think the Professor Jones, the clinical director for microbiology, about the management arrangements not working particularly well. There were issues about personalities. Dr. Armstrong wanted to get someone external, and I think the point being I was external. I wasn't involved in managing this team.
So because the closest you come to it is Board Infection Control Committee, effectively.
Indeed, that's right. So I'm not part of any of this structure. So she wants somebody outside, external, to come and have a look at this. So between myself and one of the senior, used to be personnel, head of people and change, we looked at that and we wrote this together. So that's the background to that.
And so the...
Sorry, I just missed a detail. It was we wrote this together. I just missed.
Sorry, myself and the head of people and change, HR, I guess, in old.
So if we go, please, to this bundle 14, same bundle, now page 423.
Yep.
So this is 423. Thank you. So this appears to be an email from Dr. Peters to Fran, who I assuming was supporting you.
Yeah.
Following up from her email, the bottom down the page, to invite her to a meeting.
Yes.
Now, what I think the thing that sort of has to be drawn out is that your email to her at the bottom of the page.
Yes.
There's no substantive matters on the next page.
Yeah.
So I go back one page. Describes in the second sentence, he understands that you'll be planning to demit from infection control duties shortly.
Yep.
Welcome to our discussion with you, in particular regarding issues that were encountered
Yep.
led to the situation. Now, Dr. Peters' resignation letter isn't just about what you might describe as cultural issues.
That's correct.
It's about specific complaints about safety
Yep.
that she sees as issues. But your position appears to be that what you're looking into is just the, quote, cultural stuff. Is that broadly right?
That's right. That was what Dr. Armstrong asked me to do. She was very specific about that, about what the scope of the inquiry, or not inquiry, investigation should be.
Because at the top of page 43,
Yeah.
you get the impression from Dr. Peters' email back to your assistant that she wants to discuss all the reasons.
She does, but as I say, that wasn't the scope of my of my remit.
So your answer to probably quite a lot of questions I'm about to ask you will be, I was asked to do a particular task, and so the issue around air change rates or HEPA filters isn't within my remit.
That's right, and I think that was made very clear to participants when we did conduct the interviews that was what it was about. Now, I'm no doubt that, in fact, I'm certain that some of the infection control doctors, Dr. Peters included, were disappointed by that.
Oh, we see emails that say that.
But nonetheless, that's what I was asked to do, and as you say, that's what I did.
So we can probably cut this short a little bit, because effectively it's your position that you have a meeting with Dr. Peters, and you would have had a separate meeting with Dr. Inkster, presumably.
A number of people, yes.
Some people. Yeah. And then some of the people, and Dr. Peters is a good example, but she's not the only one, come back to you and say, but you haven't considered these safety issues in their eyes.
That's correct.
And that results in a series of emails that then follows through the second half of the year.
That's right.
Yeah. And what intrigues me, I appreciate that you have been given a particular task by Dr. Armstrong.
Yeah.
But you're an experienced clinician.
Yeah.
And everything you do is supposed to put patient safety first, because that's what it's always about, interest of the patients.
Yeah.
So what do you do in broad terms when you're in receipt of quite a lot of material from Dr. Peters and Dr. Inkster saying, but we haven't considered this?
Yeah.
What do you do about that?
Well, what I did about it, I think you can see is that although it wasn't within the scope, I invited them to detail in writing just what these extra concern was. As I say, I could at that point have just said no, nothing to do with me, but I thought it would be more helpful to facilitate that, to see what their issues was. So
now we'll come back to those emails in a moment, but I want to just pick up on Dr. Redding before we leave this point in the story.
Okay.
So we had some evidence from Dr. Redding 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
Now, at this point, I get the impression Dr. Redding might have been the most long-serving microbiologist in Glasgow by then.
Could well be, yeah.
And she described how she contacted you
Yes.
to raise various concerns that she had. Now, one of them is in the same bundle at page 470. 470, sorry. So this appears to, well, this is an email. She's given evidence. This email is the email to you from her, 21st of October. So this is after you've produced your summary report. Is that right? Yeah. And it's quite a detailed email. And she's clearly, first sentence, thank you for sparing me so much of your time last week. So she met you, or you spoke to her on the phone?
I don't remember. I'd imagine would have met, but I don't remember.
Because what she said in her evidence, and just for the benefit of my colleagues, because they will write things down, we're looking at page 101, 102 of her transcript from the 4th of September. She says to you something along the lines of this: there are a number of microbiologists and infection control doctors who are raising issue. They've got all the detailed information. They're not being listened to. They're worried. There are more issues they're not being worried to. They're worried. And she gets the impression that they can't speak for themselves.
Yeah.
Now, firstly, is that something you remember or think she might have raised with you?
I am. When I see that, I have no doubt that she did. I don't remember the detail of it, but I'm sure she did.
But what you've done at this point is you've already asked Dr. Peters and Dr. Inkster to provide specification of their concerns.
Yeah.
Right. And so there's an email to Grant Archibald, another one from Dr. Redding, in the same volume, page 463. Now, this is from Dr. Redding to Grant Archibald, and this again is a little bit earlier than the previous one, so it must be before you met her, but it's describing the specific problems of the isolation rooms.
Yeah.
And so, at this point, are you now getting involved in the issue, if in a sense you haven't been before?
I'm getting involved in the issue in the sense that I'm listening to senior colleagues, and I mean, I've worked a lot with Dr. Redding in the past. I had a great respect for her. As you say, she was a very senior colleague and she had concerns. So I was happy to hear those. I would never refuse to speak to anyone about that, particularly someone like Dr. Redding. So yes, I'm involved in the sense that I'm hearing what people are saying. But it's very clear that the issues that they're raising are issues that should be being dealt with within the infection control system, the management structure. Now, it's being said to me that they are not being, and so my response to that is to raise these issues with the medical director, who at the end of the day has responsibility for that service.
So just to get the timings right,
Dr.
Inkster has resigned, or as Mr. Walter put it, demitted office for her sessions in July. You produced your report. Dr. Peters and Dr. Inkster have come back to you quite quickly and said, there's more. Dr. Redding has come in with information that's currently, which is on the screen there, about isolation rooms and specific stuff. Then she's met you. Then she's given you more stuff about culture. And there's an email that I want to ask you about how you got the information that you've based your answer on. So this is on page 476. Now, we'll come back to Dr. Peters' email at the top of the page on the 2nd of November to you in a moment, but let's look at the bottom of the page. And this is you replying to, if we go to the next page so you get the context.
Yeah.
This is a series, on the 30th of October, bottom of this page, page 477, we have an email from you, which I think attaches your report.
Right.
And then you get a response from Christine Peters, top of the page. Please I clarify whether I'm to expect an individualized response to the concerns I raised in my resignation letter and my interview with you in HR, most particularly in relation to ongoing patient safety issues. And you've explained that, of course, that interview was conducted under a remit that didn't include the patient safety issues.
Indeed.
So we go on to the next page. No, sorry, page 476. Yes. And then you've got your response to Dr. Peters on the 2nd of November at 12:27.
Yeah.
Now, what you seem to be saying is the first paragraph is you saying what you just said to me.
Yep.
That much of our discussion was around communication, behaviours, clarity of roles, and transparent decision-making.
Yep.
These are the issues we intend to address at the meeting. And you've said that.
Yes.
That's your remit.
Yes.
With regard to specific safety concerns, your main worry around the functioning of isolation facilities, whether they're fit for purpose and how this is validated, and that does seem to be our main worry.
Yep.
I understand that significant progress has been made in respect to this, and although work continues, there is now more confidence in these facilities.
Yes.
I am therefore concerned to believe there are ongoing safety issues and would be grateful if you could elaborate what these are. And she, in the next top of the page, she offers to do that. Now, the reason that can I go back to 476? What I'm keen to know is what's your source for that? Before you answer that, there's been at this point an S-bar from an HPS about this unit.
Yes.
Which isn't implemented for 2 years.
Yeah.
And we know some work is being done, but not to all the rooms. And so I'm keen to know who's telling you that significant progress has been made.
Well, the short answer to that is the medical director. I took these concerns to Dr. Armstrong, and what she told me was that these were known concerns, that the infection control management team were perfectly aware of all these issues and that they were dealing with them. She told me that progress was being made and that I should, on that basis, I get back to Dr. Peters. However, as you can see, I did invite her to expand on that.
I think she does do that.
Yeah.
Could I just check that I've got that? Yeah. Jennifer Armstrong told you that the concerns which Doctors Peters and Redding had brought to your attention were known concerns.
Yeah.
And did you say IPC management was dealing with it?
That was my understanding from Dr. Armstrong, yes.
Now we're talking about the physical condition of the hospital.
Yeah.
I think the reason I'm concerned with the details of the answer, one might have expected estates to be dealing with it or somebody with a more direct responsibility for the physical infrastructure.
Yes.
I'm just keen to understand what you were being told.
So again, forgive me if I'm rather hazy in the detail because these were conversations some years ago.
Of course.
But my understanding was that, yes, absolutely, these were matters for estate, but my understanding was that the infection control management team were leading on that and would be collaborating with the estate's colleagues.
Right. And am I remembering correctly, I suppose we're in the end of 2015, was Professor Williams still in
He was Lord, yes.
post? Yeah. Thank you.
So just to recap and make sure we've summarised where we are. It's now November. You've done your report, and we'll come back to what it says later. Once you publish it, the people who've told you in the meetings other things that are out with your remit come back to you.
Yeah.
You say, they're out with my remit, but you still receive information.
Yes.
You go and get assurances from Dr. Armstrong.
Yes.
You tell them that. They're still not happy.
Yes.
And you invite them to put it in writing.
Yes.
And they do that. So we can look at page 478, please. So we have rather a long letter.
Yes.
If we can just jump onto the next page, so we just get to the end of the letter, just see who signed it. It's both Dr. Peters and Dr. Inkster. So we go back to 478. So this is the 9th of November.
Yeah.
Now, the first thing that's striking about this is it's not just about isolation rooms, is it?
Nope.
It's a bit more comprehensive.
Yep.
And on this page, we have a discussion of the adult bone marrow treatment facility, which you, by this point, know something about because you've been told things by the hematologists and Professor Williams.
Yeah.
So that presumably wasn't a surprise to you.
Nope.
No. The next page, children's bone marrow transplant comes up. Is that something that at this point is news to you, or is it? Can you help me?
I can't remember.
Okay. I'm going to ask the same question about C and D.
Yeah.
In the other isolation rooms, did you know about these being an issue at this point?
Well, I think that may refer to what Dr. Williams had written to me.
I think it does, yes.
Yeah.
And then the other clinical areas.
I don't remember whether I
Right.
knew.
And the old bill's not within the remit of the inquiry, so
Yeah.
we'll jump over onto the next page.
Yeah.
And then we have some outbreaks described.
Yeah.
Now, the NICU one is something that was in the interest of the inquiry. Would this have been news to you unless you'd seen it mentioned in a board infection control minute?
I would imagine that would have been news to me.
Yeah, and Ebola is not within the remit of the inquiry, really, so we'll move over.
Yep.
And that's the end of the letter. Now, so the question I wanted to see is, what do you do when you get this rather more substantial document?
Yes. So I escalate that to the medical director.
Right. And do you get a response?
I can't remember. I think I can't remember the detail of it. As I say, the general response I was getting from the medical director at this time was that these were known issues and that the relevant team was dealing with it.
Because this may be a little bit unfair to deputy medical directors across the universe.
Okay.
But at one level, part of your job,
Yes.
it seems a really odd contrast. At one level, you are running part of a service.
Yes.
Often they have a lead responsibility for something important, and it's a field they know about, and they are not quite bestriding the system like a colossus, but they're making important decisions about difficult things, as you describe waiting times and that sort of stuff. On the other side, to some extent, they're a bit of a gopher.
Indeed.
Is that, how would you describe it? Because that's my
no,
word.
I think that's exactly right, and I think my role in this was really I was very much a go-between between the concerns being raised and the medical director, and yes, I think that's a fair description.
Because the way that Dr. Redding talked about you and Grant Archibald, as she felt she could approach the two of you, obviously you can't speak for him, but she approached the two of you because you and she had interacted at various committees and she felt she knew you and she felt that she could bring the message that there were problems to you. Would she not be reasonably disappointed if she realised that all that was happening is you're taking the point straight to the person she's already approached?
But I don't think she had already approached the medical director. No, I'm sure she hadn't. So what I've done is I've taken it up a rung. And also, I do remember this. I do remember being very, very clear that Dr. Redding was a doctor I had a great deal of respect for. I'd worked very closely with her in the past. And I do remember making the point that she was someone that should be listened to seriously.
Because is it unfair to characterise your involvement in this issue as, apart from the report, which we'll come back to within your remit, as in respect of the patient safety issues, to being effectively a reporter, a messenger, a provider of information rather than an actor? Would that be how you see it?
I think that's right, yes, but with the proviso that I was giving my opinion that, that this was something that needed to be taken very seriously, albeit it wasn't for me to do.
Right. What I want to do now, I think, is to show you a document which you may not have seen, but it's important that I think we ask you. So this is Bundle 20, Document 68, page 1495. Thank you. So if we just step up, zoom a little bit less. This is an email from the 26th of May 2016, so it's the next year, and it's to Dr. Inkster and Shiona Frew from David Loudon and Anne Harkness, copying David Loudon and Anne Harkness and Mr. Walsh from Mr. Parry, and it confirms, it seems, that the health board had derogated the generalised ventilation of the hospital from 6 air changes an hour to something less than that. Now, some people are surprised when they find this out in summer 2016. Did you ever discover that there'd been this change while you were working at the health board?
I don't remember this.
You don't remember this?
I don't
Either at the time or later, or?
Well, I don't remember it. I don't remember knowing or not knowing about it. I just genuinely don't remember.
The reason that I ask, if we take that off the screen, is that when it comes to a section we'll talk about in a moment, which is in February 2019, when you're asked to mentor in some way Dr. Inkster, we'll talk about that in detail in a bit.
Good.
But at that point, you're getting back involved with some of these issues, in the sense that Dr. Inkster is now the lead infection control doctor. There'll be lots of events, lots of discussions around ventilation. Cryptococcus has just happened.
Good.
And I'm wondering when it is that you, as deputy medical director with a responsibility for acute services, realised that your hospital had a derogated ventilation standard.
I don't remember. Sorry.
It just seems something that's quite striking if you found out.
I can't say anything more. I don't remember. Sorry.
What I want to do is go back to your report. So that's bundle 40.
Sorry, just so I've got the answer. You can't recall when you learned that the...
I can't recall when or if I learned that.
Right. And we're talking about the what's described as general wards. In other words, the great majority of the single rooms in the hospital.
Yeah.
Right.
So you are aware now that this is something the inquiry is interested in.
I am.
And we were set up in 2020. So was it not until then that you became, or after then, that you became aware of this problem? When did you first discover that there was a suggestion that general wards in this hospital weren't built to guidance?
I can't remember the answer to that question.
I mean, it wasn't last week, so...
No, it wasn't last week, but I did retire in 2019, so it would have, if I had known, it would have had to been prior to that, but I can't give you a specific...
Well, let's go back to your report. So that's bundle 14, volume 1, document 41, page 464.
Yep.
So you described at the top of the report that you met informally with 9 people. Now, I'm not going to ask you who they are, but we know they include Dr. Inkster and Dr. Peters.
Yep.
And you produce some general findings. Now, you're only talking about culture because that's your remit. You've explained that. And we can obviously read this report, but I want to look at item 2.
Yep.
And so in essence, are you here reporting that of the 9 people you spoke to, those who were unhappy didn't want to use the dignity at work policy at the time? Because that's effectively what I'm reading into that, and I'm wondering if that sounds right.
To be honest, I'm just reading that as well. I can't remember what the thinking was at the time.
And sections 3 to 5, you describe issues of communication.
Yep.
Now, one of the things that strikes me about this report is it's quite general. It's not very directed.
Okay.
And if it's the case that there was, at the time, quite a lot of unhappiness in the infection control team, not all in one direction as far as I can tell. So some of the doctors are saying one thing and some of the nurses are saying something else and some of the other doctors are saying something completely different, and people seem sad about what's going on. Does this report provide enough information to cause change, or would it require someone to action it?
No, I think this report is highlighting that there is a need for action.
Right.
It's not describing it's making some suggestions about actions, but I think at the end it has a list of things that need to be done. So this report is not describing in detail the solution. What it's saying is that we looked at this and yes, there is an issue and that this is something that needs to be addressed.
And so this goes back to the medical director for her to address.
Yes.
And in fact, the meeting that you suggest should take place doesn't actually take place.
No, that's just, yeah, that's true.
The bit that's thrown me slightly is paragraph 6, the bottom of the page.
Yep.
I wonder if we could zoom in on that because it's easier to read that way.
Yep.
And so this sort of seems to stand out a little bit. The way I read it is you've got 3, 4, and 5, which talk about the team in general.
Yep.
And then 6 is
Yep.
talks about accountability.
Yep.
So I'll just read that. There's also the need for greater clarity around levels of accountability in the decision-making process, especially where there are conflicting views and opinions. And then you say, on the one hand, there are reports of ICDs of having their professional authority undermined by the overturning of decisions by the IC management team. Now, to be fair, we've had evidence about that.
Right.
Whilst on the other, there are reports of ICDs not taking decisions when given authority to do so. Now, I think we may have had evidence about that, and I'm going to put to you what this might be, and if you can remember it, it'd be great.
Okay.
It seems to be a suggestion that there have been points when ICDs have been asked by the IPC management team to sign things off, to approve changes, but have been but not wanting to do so. Is that what you think you're talking about here, or is it something else?
I'm not sure about
Right.
that, to be honest. I don't know.
Okay.
I can't remember.
But the final bit is this.
Yeah.
Whilst it's clear that concerns for patient safety is the primary motivator for ICDs when arriving at decisions, there appears on occasion to be a lack of appreciation by some ICDs of the need to risk assess decisions from an organisational political perspective. What did you mean by that?
So I think what that means is that if a situation arises, there might be if we can use the word purist IC infection control solution or opinion. But that needs to be translated into the real world. So if I can give an example, if there were an infection outbreak in a ward, from a purely infection control point of view, the best thing might be to close that ward, stop any further admissions until the issue is dealt with. And that's fine. But healthcare is a series of interconnected moving parts, and you can't look at any decision in isolation. So it's a bit like a machine, you know, if you say this cog isn't working, you can't just say, well, let's just take that cog out. What you have to say is, well, what will the effect of that be on the machine as a whole? So if you shut a ward, what effect will that have on A&E waiting times? What effect will that have on ambulances outside the hospital? What effect will that have on patients being nursed in corridors? What's the bigger picture here? And taking that whole context, what is the bigger risks to patients? So should we just take that cog out because that's the purest infection control thing to do? Or are there ways of mitigating the risk such that we don't take the cog out, we keep the machine running, recognizing that that will be the lesser risk in the broad scheme of things?
So that explanation would be similar to the decision process that seems to have taken place with the adult bone marrow treatment. They had a problem, they looked at the options, and because the Beatson was still there, they could go home, as it were. But for the pediatric bone marrow treatment, isolation rooms, there was nowhere to go because Yorkville had shut. And the bone marrow transplant had to happen. So they went ahead. Is that the sort of thing you're discussing?
Yes, it wasn't specifically that I was referring to, but that's the sort of thing. Yes, that's right.
Okay. And is it similar to something that Dr. Redding was talking to us about? It wasn't Dr. Redding, it was Pamela Yandy's talking about the historical practice of sometime having to treat a infectious patient in a bay of 4 and move a bed in order to sort of keep the service going on. They don't do that anymore, but it's a similar sort of balancing process.
That's right.
Okay. Now, the reason that this stands out is that what then happens after your report makes people interested in this sentence, because subsequently it is suggested that when decisions have to be made in this hospital about decanting patients, about moving patients from one ward to the other and knock-on effects, this is 2018, 2019, Eventually, the chair of the IMT is removed in 2019, Dr. Inkster, after you've gone.
Okay.
And there is much discussion about why is this being done?
Right.
Is this people putting the institutional reputation of the health board ahead of infection management in its purest sense?
Okay.
And so it's the presence of the word political that rather screams out there. So why is the word political in there?
And that's a very good question, because when I reread this after many years, it screamed out at me as well. I'm not sure why political's there, because what I'm describing is not about reputational risk at all. What I'm describing is very much about patient safety. And that was my very clear understanding. The word political's there. I honestly cannot, at this stage, explain why that's there, because that was not reputational damage, was not in my thinking at all.
The context of this is that Dr. Peters and Dr. Inkster have resigned or demitted their infection control sessions in an environment which they claim at the time they are not being listened to by an organisation and an infection control team that doesn't want to hear them. As you said earlier in the paragraph, have been undermining their professional authority. Can you see how that paragraph as a whole, on the whole report, might be rather undermined as a piece of, I think you didn't use the word neutral, independent review? Because it seems to suggest that when you, the way it could suggest to some people that infection control requires consideration, it didn't quite say this, of the organisational reputation of the organisation. That's quite close to what you might read into it.
I can see that, and that certainly, from my perspective, that was not ever anything that I was concentrating on. And I hesitate to do this because I don't want to put the blame onto anyone else. As I say, this was a co-production, and I doubt that the word political went in from me, but on the other hand, it's my document. I have to respond.
Indeed, and so if we just step on to the next page, you then go on to the next page. You then discuss at 7. There's a sense that infection control does not have the same degree of senior management oversight as other acute service directorates. Now that's an odd thing to come up, because Mr. Walsh, in his evidence, is quite adamant that his direct line of communication to the medical director is a creature of the leave-in inquiry. It's actually a specific recommendation. In many ways, it reads like Lord Maclean saying, make sure Mr. Walsh has direct line of communication. And so is this you suggesting that it might benefit having some other management role connection than just this direct line of communication?
As I say, it's been a few years since I wrote this, so I can't quite remember the context. I think what you might read into that is yes, Mr. Walsh has a direct line to the medical director, but that's quite a gulf.
Right.
So, it being such a gulf, is there a need for something in between? Maybe not to take away the responsibilities from the medical director, but at least to provide some extra oversight and support.
Because at one level, a criticism that one could make of you at this point is that there's a problem. You've been given a relatively tight remit. You produce this report, which has this slightly strange previous paragraph, but you produce the report, and then you've been received further representations on specific safety issues, and you've reported all of these straight up to the medical director. And from the point of view of Dr. Peters and Dr. Inkster, nothing's changed.
Okay.
And so here at paragraph 7, you're practically suggesting that what you really need is someone who's got an eye on this or is supporting. How would you describe this level of support?
Yeah, I think that's right. I think if you think of other services as well as general managers, there are directors of the services as well, not board directors, but operational directors. And I suppose, I can't remember if infection control reported up through, I think they maybe did through regional services. So there may have been that,
But
link.
is this you having your contribution at the time? I mean, things have changed since then, of course.
Yeah. I'm struggling to remember, to be
Okay.
honest.
Right. Now, if we could go on, please, to Bundle 14, Volume 1, page 490. So I want to take this email thread in bits. So again, what we have at the top is a reply to you from Dr. Peters on the 29th of December. So this is a month later than the letter. Remember, we looked at the letter the 9th of November.
Yep.
And on the 22nd of December, bottom of the page, we have an email from you. Now, I want to look at the whole thing and then we'll ask you a question. So the email is 1:10 on the 22nd of December. Dear Christine and Teresa, I'm conscious that we've not yet replied formally to your letter, which must be the one on 9th of November, in which you documented your outstanding concerns regarding infection control at the campus. I am mindful that events are moving on at some pace and that many issues raised are being actually looked at. Pertinent, of course, is the recent involvement of HFS and HPS over the page. Given the work undertaken on the plan, would you please confirm your concerns had been addressed or if anything remains an outstanding issue? Now, Dr. Peters described your letter as somewhat disingenuous. And the reason that I think she might have done that is because this is only a month, well, it's 5 weeks after their rather large letter, which we've just been through, with lots of points, some of which might have been new to you at the time. It's a couple of days before Christmas. We all know how hospital gets a bit busy at Christmas and doctors are desperately trying to clear things up and on-calls are happening and it's not a time, it's time for clearing inboxes in some senses. Okay. So is this request, is it all fine, effectively, entirely honest on your part?
Well, I mean, the short answer to that has to be yes, because I would never knowingly do anything dishonest.
But do you think there's any realistic possibility that everything on that letter would have been sorted without you knowing about it in the previous 6 weeks?
I guess this comes back to what I was saying earlier in my previous response to their queries. These were matters that I was raising with the medical director. As I say, they weren't in my direct responsibility. However, I had entered this dialogue, and therefore, I didn't want to be. I still wish to be facilitative, if you like, but I'm relying on the information given to me. And I'm passing that on. So I guess it came back to what you said. I mean, you used the word gopher, and I suppose I kind of feel a wee bit like this in this context.
So would it be, I mean, you may not remember, but would we reasonably entitled to assume that at some point between the 9th November letter and this email, you will have had a conversation or an exchange of emails with Dr. Armstrong, and you'll have told her what's in the letter, and you may have received some form of reply, but you don't remember?
I don't remember. What I do remember is I mean, I met Dr. Armstrong regularly. I mean, at least weekly, if not more often. So these were matters that we would be important. I'd be bringing to our attention on a regular basis.
And if we just go back to the previous page, we see at this point that Dr. Peters, just after Christmas, tells you that there are still problems and there are more.
Yep.
Right. Now, if we go back to your statement, page 144 of your statement, question 28, bottom of the page, Dr. Inks and Dr. Peters suggested that an external expert be brought in to address these issues.
Yep.
And we asked you, did it occur?
Yep.
And you said you do not know.
Yep.
Effectively, is this back to your same answer? You would have passed that up to the medical director, and that's
correct.
Yeah. And I added into the documents list, didn't take this off the screen, a long number of BICC meetings you either attended or gave apologies to, and if I reference back to your earlier evidence about the BICC, that wouldn't have been the place where you'd expected to see that reported, or the appointment of an expert. Because we don't see that happening
Yes,
anywhere.
yes, I think I would have expected to see that come there. Yes, I think I would have.
So we'll have to ask Dr. Armstrong.
Yeah, yeah.
But if there had been one appointed, it would probably turn up somewhere like the BICC on the report.
I would have imagined so. Yes.
Now, what I want to do now is to turn to events of 2019. But what I might suggest, my lord, why don't we break for our coffee break now? Because it would give me an opportunity to see if there's any issues arising from what I've just dealt with from my colleagues, and that might short circuit matters.
Well, I'm more than happy to.
So I've only got about 10 minutes left with the rest of the material in 2019.
I'm more than happy to be guided, so take a break until 11:30.
Yes, that'd be really helpful.
Um,
We'll come back to 2019 at 12:30.
Okay.
Dr. Stewart, if you could be back for 11:30, and you'll be taken to the witness room. Ms. McIntosh.
Thank you. I want to ask one group of questions about the end of 2015 and then move on to 2019.
Okay.
And so before, the last document we had on the screen was the email that you sent Dr. Peters on the 22nd of December and her reply on the 29th. And I think at this point, your evidence is that you were asked in the summer to do the piece of work on what you might broadly describe as culture. Now, at that point, you would have known, because presumably you'd have seen Dr. Peters and Dr. Inkster's resignation letters. Would you have seen them beforehand?
I can't remember, but presumably I can't remember.
It's quite possible that
Yeah.
you'd have known their issues are wider than culture at that point.
Yeah.
But you were given a specific remit by Dr. Armstrong. You do your piece of work, you speak to the 9 people, you report it back beginning of October, and you get pushback from Dr. Peters and Inkster, and they tell you more problems about adult bone marrow transplant, and you say, in broad terms, these are being addressed, or you understand they're being addressed.
Yes.
And your evidence is that that's what you're being told by Dr. Armstrong.
Yes.
And they say, effectively, oh, no, they're not.
Yeah.
So you say, give me a letter.
Yeah.
So they produce this 4-page letter on 9th of November.
Yeah.
And am I right to assume that by the time we get to the 22nd of November, you've again gone to Dr. Armstrong with that letter, and presumably, although you can't remember, she would have said, these are being addressed?
That is my understanding, yes. As I say, I can't remember details of individual conversations, but yes,
that's the sort of
that is what I
assumption.
understand to have happened, yes.
So your position is you wouldn't have written that letter on the 22nd of December
Yeah.
unless you'd received some form of information.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the reference to HPS, and I mean, I didn't know anything about that.
Yeah.
That didn't fall within my understanding at all.
There's 2 ways to take on this. The first thing is your role at this point is as it's the sort of corporate side of your task. You're being asked to do things by the medical director to help her, effectively. You're acting for her.
Yes.
Right. If we just look at the situation we find ourselves in with that letter of the 9th of November, there's 2 possibilities about any of the facts in there.
Mm-hmm.
They're either right or they're wrong. If we just, for the purposes of this question, assume that they're right, and you send that to Dr. Armstrong,
Mm-hmm.
and she comes back and provides you with some assurances,
Mm-hmm.
then there are 2 possibilities happening here, aren't there? One is that either she's misunderstood
Mm-hmm.
or she's being misled, is one of some range of options around there, or, what seems rather unlikely, she's actively misleading you. So we put that one aside.
Yeah.
So if we, in a position where her response to you after these 2 pushbacks from Dr. Inkster and Dr. Peters is to tell you these issues are being addressed.
Yes.
They clearly think they're not being addressed.
Yes.
What did you do to help Dr. Armstrong by effectively challenging her?
Yeah.
Oh, no, they're not, Dr. Armstrong. What did you do about that in that way?
Well, as I say, I can't remember the detail of the conversations I had with Dr. Armstrong around this, but I think all I can say is that I did bring these matters to her attention, that we had these conversations. How robustly I was an advocate, if you like, for Dr. Peters and Inkster, I can't remember. These would have been covered in the conversation. I guess all I can say is at the end of the day, I was not in a position to hold the medical director to account. That wasn't my role, nor was I, able to do that.
But ultimately, I mean, at this point, you're quite a senior doctor.
Yeah.
You've got a lot more clout in the organisation than Dr. Peters and Dr. Inkster.
Yeah.
Doesn't it behoove you at that point, when it's been pushed back by them twice now, at least, to do more than simply send another email on 22nd December saying, is it all fine now, effectively? What I'm worried about is whether this is in some sense an abrogation of your responsibility as a clinician.
No, I don't think it is at all. So again, it comes back to context, if you like. So round at this time, although we're dealing in detail with infection control matters, I am dominantly up to my eyes in managing other aspects of the service. The unscheduled care, the A&E challenges are severe, and that is consuming pretty much all of my time. These issues are brought to me. They're not something that I've chosen not to deal with. They're something I cannot deal with. They're not something that fall within my ambit of responsibility at all, nor do I have any authority in this matter. I bring them to the medical director. There's coming and goings. I have conversations with her. I pass on all the information I've got. And at the end of the day, I think that's all I can do. As I say, I can't hold the medical director to account for this. And frankly, I'm kind of almost caught in the crossfire here, but I've got other things that I'm doing.
I understand that, but the thing that's different about the 22nd of December email is it reads like a simple pass-through of a message.
Yep.
When you're not a gopher. Yep. You're the deputy medical director.
Yep.
And so I'm putting to you that in some way that email is you effectively not stepping up when someone needed to and taking this seriously.
Well, I'm not really quite sure what I could have done, to be honest.
Well, one thing you could have done is not sent the 22nd of December email in the way it's sent.
Well, if that was the information that I had and that was my understanding, then, I don't see why I wouldn't have sent it. I mean, I can't. As I say, I don't really know what else I can do. The medical director has responsibility for this service. She's senior to me. I've raised it with her, I think, on a number of occasions, and she has told me that she's dealing with it. She's perfectly aware of it. I don't know what you're suggesting.
Okay, what I'm suggesting is that the audience for this email is Dr. Peters and Dr. Inkster, effectively. Mm-hmm. And so we know that in the summer of that year, they resigned or demitted their sessions.
Yeah.
There's a measure of distress, because you've observed that in your meetings with the 9 people. You know it's a dysfunctional team.
Yep.
They've come back to you with quite substantial pieces of work.
Okay.
This is now the third time, or possibly the fourth, but the third time when they've had to set out their concerns about patient safety in a written form. The week before Christmas, day before Christmas Eve, 2 days before Christmas Eve. This surely gives the impression to them that they're just not being listened to, not being taken seriously. I recognise you're the conduit, but you're the conduit for them getting the impression that the organisation is not taking their concerns seriously. How would you react to that?
I don't think I can add anything to what I've said. I've done what I can do in my view. I believe I've represented their concerns appropriately to the person who appropriately should be dealing with them. And as I say, I'm not in a position then to hold that person to account.
Right. Well, I want to move on to 2019. So this is obviously 4 years later. Mm. Well, not quite. It's 3, just over 3, because we're talking about January 2019.
Okay.
So can we look at Bundle 1, document 59, page 270? So if with a bit of luck, this is a IMT meeting which you attend.
Yep.
And it's the 17th of January, and I think it might be the first or second IMT meeting of this sequence.
Yep.
And there's clearly been the unfortunate deaths of 2 patients in the latter part of the previous year, and there's much discussion in these IMTs. Now, I think I now know what the answer is going to be, but the question is, why are you here?
Because the medical director asked that I go there.
And so, whilst in a sense she go and you go, presumably she doesn't just tell you to go to a meeting, she briefs you about what you might expect. I guess I don't remember, but I guess she probably would have. Yeah.
So
the thing that I'm quite keen to understand from you is this deputy medical director role, where a senior clinician with experience and authority is sent to an IMT by the medical director. And occasionally, although I don't think you do it in these ones, comes out with action points. But they also often ask questions. Your predecessor asks questions. And am I right in assuming that you would have had some form of briefing, in the sense a phone call, please go, I can't go, keep an eye on this, that sort of stuff?
Yeah, except Dr. Armstrong was there.
Exactly.
Yeah, I know. No, to be honest, I mean, it's a good question, and it's sometimes a question I used to ask myself. Why am I here? I think Dr. Armstrong liked me to go to meetings, even if she was going to be there. I think partly it was about kind of situational awareness, just so that I could hear what was going on. Sometimes I think it might have been for a bit of moral support. Sometimes it might be so that I could be, a bit of a sounding board afterwards. There would be various reasons. But to be honest, my specific remit at this meeting, I don't really know why I was there. I'm not referenced at all as contributing, and I don't come away with any actions. And I think I don't go to any other ones.
Because there's an issue that arises around these IMTs, which you might be a good person to ask about.
Yeah.
We've been through, not this one, but previous IMTs and looked at the different classes of people who turn up.
Yep.
And it seems uncontroversial that you'll have infection prevention control team members, doctors, nurses, and sometimes Mr. Walsh. Mm-hmm. You will have the treating clinicians of various flavours depending on who the patients are. You'll have some estates people if there's an estates angle. Yep. You'll have Callum, the minute taker.
Yep.
You might have someone from the laboratory side, either a data person or a microbiologist. But then you get the medical director, the deputy medical director, the director of estates, quite senior people turning up. Now, your position seems to be that you're there probably to listen and to see what's going on. Would you be conscious of the idea that you being there changes the meeting? Because the weight of your presence as senior people influences what's going on at the meeting.
Well, whilst that's very flattering, I don't believe that that is the case. No, I don't believe so. I mean, I've been to many of these meetings, and I've never felt that my presence in particular has inhibited discussion.
Would you necessarily know if it was?
I suppose not, but I would like to think I wasn't such a scary person that people...
I think I'm using you as a representative of a class of people.
Yeah, okay, in general.
But if we look at this meeting, we can see on the list, we see managers whose service is involved. So Mr. Redfern and Mr. Jenkins, for example. We see microbiologists, Dr. Kennedy. We see a relatively senior nursing manager, Ms. Rogers. We see Tom Walsh. We see Professor Steele. We see the medical director. We see a lot of people who are quite senior in the organisation. And do you have any view on whether the weight of seniority turning up to these meetings might in some way be influencing what goes on?
Yes, I think it could, but I think it could influence it, either way. It might inhibit discussion, although, as I say, that's not been my experience, not just with me. But it also, I think, gives out a message that this is something that has been taken seriously, and there's significant management interest in it, and I think that's potentially a good thing.
And the other thing to ask about these is, I think you're here for 3 of them.
Yeah.
In these 3 IMTs in January of 19, were you aware of there being a pre-meeting?
No.
There wasn't a meeting, or you weren't aware of it?
I wasn't aware of it.
Right. Now, the final thing I want to do is, I'll take this off the screen, is that we gave you access to Dr. Inkster's statement.
Yep.
Now, she hasn't given evidence yet.
Yep. But
in her statement, she described how in February 2019, I'm going to put this in some detail, I understand you disagree, that in February 2019, you were assigned by Dr. Armstrong to be a mentor to Dr. Inkster. Had you at that point had any training about mentoring?
Yes.
Yes, right. And had you mentored people before? Or?
Yes.
Many, or?
Yes, many times in my but in both my clinical job and in my managerial job, yes, I had. Yes.
And so what Dr. Inkster describes is that the meetings involve you raising with her what she sees as inappropriate subjects. Now, I recognise you want to respond, but I'm just going to give a rough summary of what it is. And she suggests that the focus seems to be on establishing who was the whistleblower, rather than dealing with the issues she had, and asking questions about who was talking to the press and who was near to retirement. Now, firstly, what's your recollection of these meetings?
Okay, so the context of this is that, well, I wasn't assigned to her. Dr. Armstrong felt that it might be helpful to Dr. Inkster if she had some form of mentorship to assist in her role. As I say, I had quite a lot of experience in mentorship, and I had previous training. One of the absolutely fundamental of mentorship is that it's a mutually agreeable process. You can't impose a mentor on anyone. So my first question to Dr. Armstrong, and I do remember this with quite a lot of clarity, this whole process. Firstly, because it's towards the end of my time, but secondly, because it was a rather unusual situation. So my memory is very clear in this. I asked Dr. Armstrong whether Dr. Inkster had signed up to this, whether she was happy with it. It was something that she wanted, and I was assured she did. Furthermore, at the first meeting with Dr. Inkster, as is standard practice, I was very clear with her what the rules of engagement were, that this was entirely voluntary, that if she was unhappy with me as a mentor, that was absolutely fine, and with no detriment, she could ask for another mentor. If at any time she was unhappy with the way things were going, she could call a halt in this. I made it very clear that it was about her and about her setting the agenda. I wasn't there to coach her. I wasn't there to appraise her. I was there as a sounding board to help her identify her development needs. So it was all about her, and it was very much focused on her. So I'm very, very clear to start with that was the context that I went forward. The allegations that she goes on to make in, I think it's paragraph 747 about whistleblowing and mortgages is completely and utterly untrue. It is an absolute fabrication. None of that happened. I'm very, very clear about that. I have to say I read that with absolute astonishment, and I would add some anger, because it is completely untrue.
Can you recollect what you did discuss at the meeting? In general terms?
In general terms, it was basically about, as I say, Dr. Inkster would set the agenda. It would be about how, encourage her to reflect on how she was coping with the job, what she thought her development opportunities were, what bits of the job she was finding more challenging, what she might do to address that, what learning opportunities there might be. It was all of those sort of things. The content in 747 is astonishing.
I'm just checking in for a date, if you don't mind. I just want to check one thing before we understand anything. So we have an event going on that you might or might not be aware of. But so I wondered if we could just connect the two. So I have some evidence that on the beginning of February of that year, 7th of February, there's a discussion between Dr. Inkster and Professor Jones about bringing in some more help to the team, additional sessions, and this is approved of by Dr. Armstrong. Is that something that would have come up in that mentoring session?
I can't remember. I'm unaware of that specific interaction with Professor Jones, but we would have discussed things like workload and support and so on. So it may well have as a kind of general point, yes.
Well, look, we'll ask Dr. Inkster about that when she gives evidence.
I would be very grateful if you did, because without overdoing this, it's absolutely a fabrication.
Okay, right. Now, the final thing is you retired before Dr. Inkster was removed as the chair of the IMT,
okay,
which was in August of 2019.
Yep.
Now, what I wanted to do is just finally explore with you some understanding of what you see looking back at 2019 and 20, what you can remember. I don't think we asked you this in your statement, but
okay,
effectively this is the context. We have a decant from the Shahali unit in September 2018 towards 6A, which wearing your acute services hat must have been a thing you had to worry about.
Yep.
And like you said about the organizational impact of infection control issues would have had knock-on effects all over the system.
Yep.
So that's something you knew about.
Yep.
You would have presumably known about the fitting of the chlorine dioxide dosing into the water system and the appearance of point-of-use filters around the hospital, because that would have affected some of your wards, effectively.
Not sure if I knew the detail of that. I don't.
But you definitely knew about the decant. And obviously you knew about the Cryptococcus cases because you were in the IMT.
Yes.
And what's intriguing to me is that in 2018, the the impression I get is that although there's some moments of tension about what's the best solution, ultimately the advice of Dr. Inkster to decant is followed through.
Yeah.
And a senior management team group, which doesn't include you, make a decision to go ahead with that decant. And then over that winter, it's the view of Dr. Inkster and others, the problems don't go away. Now, are you able to help us the point where you think, if you think at all, whether when relations between Dr. Inkster and the hospital corporately might have broken down, because they seem to have done at some point. But I'm wondering what your perspective is that, as someone who's in and around these events, albeit not directly involved in most of them.
Certainly when I was engaging with Dr. Inkster around the mentorship side of things, it was clear that she was thoughtful about her role, that she was struggling, I think, with elements of her role, and that was the whole point of the mentorship, to try and help her with that. And I guess it wouldn't come as a surprise to me to hear what you're saying, but I have no direct knowledge of what, if you like, brought it to the final tipping point.
And so if we can, given that you have a strong recollection of these events,
Yes.
how would you characterize the way that Dr. Armstrong asked you to take on the mentorship role? How did she put it in the context? Because obviously if you ask someone to mentor a colleague, you have to tell them to some extent what's going on with the colleague at the time. So how did Dr. Armstrong set out, in a sense, your task of mentoring Dr. Inkster?
Well, it was to support Dr. Inkster. Dr. Armstrong recognised that Dr. Inkster was struggling with parts of her role, and Dr. Armstrong had hoped that by helping Dr. Inkster identify development needs, learning needs, training opportunities, whatever, that would strengthen her in her role. Because I think Dr. Armstrong, certainly at that point, my impression was Dr. Armstrong was very keen that Dr. Inkster didn't continue in post, and therefore that the mentorship thing was supposed to be supportive towards that.
Because the thing that strikes me in this, I may just have the wrong perspective because I'm just seeing bits of information and missing out other data points. But you have some involvement, which we've discussed, in the events of 2015 when Dr. Inkster resigns their ICD sessions, and there are these exchanges in the second half of 2015 about patient safety, albeit it's not a remit, and you're reporting them back to Dr. Armstrong. You leave these events. You come back to these events in the early part of 2019. Are you the right person to be helping someone when effectively to some extent, it feels like the end of a long story, or the same thing is still going on?
Well, I suppose, as you say, it had been some considerable time that I had any direct involvement in this. As I've made the point repeatedly, I actually wasn't directly involved in the whole management structure or management of the infection control team. So to a large extent, I had been external to this. I guess you could debate, was I the right person or not? I suppose in my favour, without blowing my own trumpet, I was senior, I had a lot of experience, and I think in my view, I did potentially have something that I could offer to Dr. Inkster that would be positive. In hindsight, might somebody else have been better? Possibly. But to be very clear, this was a mutually agreed arrangement. And Dr. Inkster had the opportunity at any point, without any detriment, to call time on it.
Well, I think I've asked all the questions I need to ask, but normally we take a few minutes to see whether anyone else has any further questions they'd like me to ask.
Yes, Dr. Stewart, what I need to do is check with the room, as it were, as to whether there's any additional questions which might be asked. So if I could ask you to go back to the witness room for what I would hope is no more than 10 minutes.
Okay.
Sleeping. I've got one question, my lord. Mr. Chubb, one question. If we think back to the mentoring process,
Yes.
from your memory of the process, how would you describe, from what you remember of the meetings, what Dr. Inkster saw as the main issues for her at the time?
Well,
I mean, since it may be a confidential process, but I think both of you have probably broken that confidentiality now.
well, yeah. Well, that is a confidential process. I think she had issues around workload. I think she had issues around support generally. I think from a number of people. I think she was finding the position quite stressful, and was having some difficulty dealing just with the demands that were placed upon her. I can't really remember any more detail than that. These would be the general themes, I think.
That's no more questions from me.
Can I just clarify? In your role as mentor to Dr. Inkster, was it one meeting or a series of meetings?
Dr. Inkster refers to 3 meetings in her statement, and that could well be right.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Stewart. Okay. These are the questions we had to ask you today, and therefore you're now free to go. But before you do go, can I just express my thanks for your attendance here today, but also for the work that you've obviously been involved in preparing your statement and looking at documents in preparation of your evidence. I'm grateful for that and would thank you for that. But as I say, you're now free to go.
Thank you.
So, Dr. Deegan, who's our afternoon witness, isn't due to arrive in the building until 1:30, so I'm afraid we can't start early.
Well, I think we'll, in that case, we'll adjourn until 2 o'clock.